right, we're back on the record in case 2014-1. Before we get into the case itself, I want to just remind us, the three of us, and those in the audience who are listening in, how we are handling this. 6 issues have been identified and presented. We will go through them sequentially in the manner in which they were presented, in the manner in which they have been raised, and we will follow the outline in the bench memorandum that we have. Procedurally, that means we need to, and so that we can actually discuss each issue, I will ask for a motion, and it needs to be a positive motion, so what you need to do is you need to reword each issue in the form of a motion. It needs to be seconded, it will be debated, and then we will vote on it. Usually in boards, the chair does not make motions, doesn't second, and is the last one to speak on a particular motion. But here, because there are only 3 of us, we need to relax that requirement, and so I will at least be seconding motions, if not actually be making them. That doesn't mean that I will automatically support it, just as the person who is making the motion is not required to support his own motion. It is simply for procedural purposes so that the matter gets raised properly. Are there any questions? Mr. Stewart? Mr. Saxby? Any questions? No? All right, then I will entertain a motion on issue number 1.
Go ahead.
I'll try. I would make a motion to indicate that the Planning and Zoning Commission did not err by not considering necessary and essential services that the proposed substation expansion would provide to the community.
Well, let me help you a little here. The way that I would like to hear this motion worded is that P&Z erred by not considering the necessary and essential services that the proposed substation expansion would provide to the community.
Oh, okay. I thought when you were saying
so
positive.
That's what I meant by.
Okay.
So that we, in a way, follow the issues as we have them and as they were addressed in the bench memorandum. Okay, so the motion is P&Z erred by not considering the necessary and essential services that the proposed substation expansion would provide to the community. Is there a second? Mr. Haxby?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, would you care to discuss your motion, please?
Okay. There's not a lot of information that relates directly to necessary and essential services, except that the Planning and Zoning Commission did mention that electricity was an essential service. But other than that, I didn't see where they addressed how the proposed substation would provide necessary and essential services as part of furthering the goals of the Chugach-Eagle River Comp Plan.
Mr. Haxby.
You know, I just didn't notice a lot of discussion about it. I think it was relatively ignored.
Okay, well, let me see if I can help you a little bit here, because I found quite a bit of discussion regarding this matter. And First of all, this is obviously a legal issue. But I can tell you that, for example, on page 132 of the transcript, you will find that Commissioner Robinson addressed the issue. And towards the bottom of the page, 132, and starting at line 18, he says, you know, we need substations and we need utilities in all neighborhoods and all parts of the community, but they do have to consider their surroundings. Similarly, on page 128, Commissioner Ferguson talked about it. On top of the page of 128, but we come back to it, we need power. MEA wants to sell us power, sending it back to the community doesn't do what the community needs unless we can give some guidance to the community and to MEA how to solve this thing. Also, page 136, Commissioner Mulcahy talked about it. This is tough for me. I'm a huge fan of the new power station. I understand I'm not, maybe not in the total majority on this, but I'm convinced that we need this upgrade, an upgraded substation to be able to support the neighborhood. It's essential that we do, but it needs to be done right. Finding of fact number 4 of the resolution specifically addresses the issue. If we go to the resolution 213-159, paragraph 4, the Commission recognized that electricity is an essential public service. So, to my way of thinking, and as I review this, the essential nature of electrical substations was recognized by planning and zoning, was addressed by them. And after reviewing the transcript as a whole, I must tell you that I'm left with a firm impression that P&Z was very well aware of the need to do something here. But what comes through clearly also is a sense of frustration by P&Z that MEA apparently did not do what it should have done to make this substation expansion palatable to the community and to make sure that the neighborhood was not negatively impacted or that any negative impacts would be minimized. And so, as I see it, it does in fact, P&Z did in fact consider the necessary and essential services. Commissioner Spring says on page 130 and 131, he asked whether this furthered, I'm just trying to find it, give me a second here. Talked about the comprehensive plan for Chugach Eagle River in connection with this. One other question I have regarding conditional use standards is the standard regarding the comprehensive plan. The Chugach Eagle River Comprehensive Plan, and one of the goals, as the petitioner's representative stated, is that the facilities have to, or are needed, or it should be permitted, that accommodate growth and development in Chugach. Now, I don't have the information to determine whether or not this particular facility meets that goal. And on the next page he says, I have no basis of determining whether it's true or not, so as a result I believe that it probably fails to meet that standard for conditional use. So again, I think that the Planning and Zoning Commission was very much aware of the essential services that this proposed substation expansion would provide, but failed for various reasons. The application failed for various reasons. And so for that reason, I would affirm the Planning and Zoning decision in this case, and I would vote against the motion. Having said that, does that generate more discussions by my fellow board members here?
So basically, run by your thought on this again.
The question is whether planning and zoning erred in not considering the necessary and essential services that the proposed substation expansion would provide. And what I'm saying is that the record is replete with references to the necessary services that would be provided by the substation. So consequently, it cannot be said that P&Z did not take into consideration the necessary services. They did, in fact, take into consideration the necessary services. There is, by way of elaborating, Commissioner Yoshimura, and I can't quote the page right now, but at one point she says, why don't you ask for a postponement here? You can see that there are all these problems here. We want to help you out, but you can't get there from here, in essence. And so it is clear to me that they were very much aware of what was going on and how necessary this was. And so for that reason, I would vote against the motion.
Is the standard there must be substantial evidence in the record to support that? Is that what it is?
This is a legal issue, so you exercise your independent judgment. This is a,
Is that a is it a requirement of a conditional use that MEA proves that there's that it provides more than enough evidence that it's a requirement? Or is it up to the Planning and Zoning Commission to make that judgment? That's an issue for me, and that's what I'm searching for. In whose opinion, and who's the deciding fact whether or not that substation is required? Is it MEA? Obviously, MEA thinks that it is required because
Otherwise, they wouldn't have applied for it.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have applied for it.
Yeah.
And so, in their opinion, they're saying, we've deemed this as a requirement, otherwise we wouldn't have applied. And so does P&Z, are they the people to say, you've either met the standard that it's a requirement or it's not? Or is it like and I'll just pick an issue that'll kind of hit home here, that is it a standard that we're the engineers, we've stamped this as a requirement, and this will solve our requirements, or it will not? Who is the deciding factor on that? Is it P&Z or is it MEA?
Well, it seems to me that MEA needs to make the case, first of all, that it is needed in that particular area. Okay? And particularly in an R6 zone, which this is, the question then is, can they put it in there willy-nilly, or do they have to jump through hoops? Now, the code has specified that if they want to put it in there, they can't go through it willy-nilly. They need to get a conditional use permit.
Right.
And so, in order to qualify for the conditional use permit, they need to comply with the various standards that the conditional use ordinance, or the criteria under which a conditional use permit can be issued. And there's a whole,
That's on page 2.
Sally very nicely lined them all up here so we don't have to rifle through the code. There is a whole raft of them. There are, in essence, 4 conditions that need to be complied with before the P&Z may approve. Doesn't say shall, it says may approve. Okay? And so the first one is, does it further the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan? Second one is, does it conform to the standards for that use in this title and regulations promulgated under this title? And then it goes through with various considerations, but it doesn't necessarily say that just because you want a power station in here, we have to automatically grant you that. And so the gist of the issue is, did P&Z fail to consider the importance of having a substation expansion in this particular location? That's the gist of this first issue. And what I'm saying is that P&Z did not fail to consider that. There were, in fact, several commissioners who were prepared to grant the conditional use permit if they jumped through certain hoops. And for reasons that we don't need to discuss right now at this issue, they didn't jump through all the hoops, and that's why it was eventually denied. But the main issue here for purposes of deciding issue number 1 is, did P&Z consider the importance of having the new substation expansion there?
And I guess to complete the loop, that would relate to the first criteria for a conditional use under A, which is furthering the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan.
We had the issue about Yoshimura. That was on 117 and 118,
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
referring to the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Let's take a look at that. You said 117, 118?
Right. She ended up on line 16 and 17 on page 118, referring to the comprehensive plan.
Wait a minute.
Is that the one you're referring to?
You're looking at page 118? No, I think this is she addressed a different issue in this comment. But I can tell you that that she later on said, and I need to dig it out, I will come across it. That she was frustrated that they were not going to ask for continuance. Oh, here it is, on page 116. As you know, the commission has a variety of choices. One is to approve it, one is to disapprove it, one is to approve it with conditions, and the other one, the fourth one, is to postpone it and send it back to work with the community. And it was clear that MEA didn't want that. But it is clear to me that the mandate of the conditional use standard, A, that Ms. Kuzma referred to, that it furthers the goals of the comprehensive plan, that was considered. It is simply that for reasons that we will discuss, that in spite of the importance of this, it did not rise to the level, the application did not rise to the level where P&Z felt that it could grant it. I get this puzzled look from both of you.
Well, I sense, I sense from reading the transcript and reading the documents that there was a sense of frustration
By P&Z?
by P&Z.
Yes.
And that
I think that's palpable. I think all of us would agree to that.
And I mean, I think that just comes through just clear as a bell.
Mhm.
And frankly, looking at what MEA did, with respect to engineering, with respect to the other stuff in this case, I mean, drainage, I mean, all of it, as a whole, I find it, I don't know the word to actually say here. It's surprising that they turned it down. They really do. And because I look at it from a developer standpoint, I've seen these things before, to where, you know, somebody gets frustrated, they just say, no, forget it, get out of here. We're gonna deny it. And so I sensed a frustration because you had somebody saying, no, 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 don't do this. And then you have, on the other side, you have MEA, who said, look, we've gone through, we've redesigned these things, we've done all these things that's necessary by our standards. And, you know, we've done everything to accommodate the neighbors, we've done all these things, and P&Z wants a compromise. That's what I sensed. That's what I sensed, and MEA said, look, give us up or down. That's the sense that I got out of this stuff. And I find it hard when you have, whether it's in the building department or the P&Z or anybody else, I find it difficult to understand how public officials can look at, you know, stamped drawings, things that have been done by registered engineers, no different than you know, a lawyer, and say, and substitute their judgment for stamped drawings. And so I sensed a frustration in there for compromise, and MEA was like, we're already into this thing, give us our permit up or down.
Well, let us get back to the motion at hand, which is, did P&Z err by not considering the necessary and essential services that the proposed substation would provide to the community? Considering that that is the question that's on the floor, the issue that's on the floor.
Okay, so we're gonna vote on that.
That is the issue we are going to vote on right now, and so the question is whether you feel that P&Z did not take the necessary and essential services to be provided by the expansion of the substation into consideration.
Okay, I'm fair enough to vote on that one.
That's the issue, okay? Mr. Stewart.
In Chugach Electric's certification to one of their exhibits that they put on there.
Are you talking about Chugach Electric
I'm
or MEA?
sorry, MEA.
Okay.
I was
Okay.
going to refer back to that other one.
All right.
So I didn't forget that. MEA, where they reference the convenience and necessity of the public, the services that they are going to require.
Yes.
So there's a strong indication here, and that was not disputed. In fact, it looks like there's some pretty strong implications in here now that we've gone through that, and I can see that.
Bob, what page?
That's Exhibit 1
Of what?
on the appellate brief,
Well, the regulatory certificate of public convenience.
public convenience and necessity.
Oh, you're referring to MEA's general
Yeah.
certificate? Okay. How does that relate to this particular substation?
Well, they're deeming it a convenience and a necessity for the public, in that they're saying that it needs to get upgraded, or they cannot further, the implication is they cannot further the growth and provide the services that are necessary for that area
Okay.
without that upgrade.
But does that mean that they can do whatever they want to?
No. No, they still have to comply with the conditions.
Okay. So in terms of making a decision, in terms of P&Z making a decision,
So the question you're asking, Baron, let me see if I can hose this down into a nice neat little thing. What you're asking is,
there
did
is a
PNC
motion on the
consider it,
floor.
or did they not consider it?
Correct.
It has nothing to do with the rest of the issues, just did at some level PNC consider it or not consider it?
Correct.
Whether they consider it right or wrong, that's not the question. Did
That's
they
not the
consider it?
question. Did they consider it?
Okay,
Okay, it does look like there is substantial evidence that they did consider that,
okay, so,
as we look through all of the
Okay.
different references.
Okay, and can you, we need to establish a record here for purposes of this hearing. Can you point to additional items that have not yet been brought up? I mentioned comments by Commissioners Robinson, Ferguson, and Mulcahy. And you were referring to the certificate of convenience and necessity.
Yes.
Is there any additional evidence that you can find in the record that we can point to?
I don't know that it's even necessary. Did they consider it or didn't they?
Well, what do you base that?
Right, yeah, even the items that you pointed to,
Okay.
there was consideration.
Okay,
Whether it's right or wrong, we're not, that's not part of this, other than did they consider.
okay. Any further discussions regarding the motion?
No, I'm okay with
No,
it.
I'm okay.
Okay. All right, so the motion is P&Z erred by not considering the necessary and essential services that the proposed substation extension would provide to the community. A vote in favor would agree that they did not consider it, and a vote against the motion would hold that they did consider it. We ready to vote?
Okay, is that,
That's typical lawyer,
That's
Baron.
a double negative.
No, meaning they did consider it. Sorry.
Can we word it differently?
Okay, it's a
No,
typical.
Out here, I thought it was.
You said it
That was
correctly. The
perfect if we're
motion
in
is
court,
that they
Baron, but we're
erred
not.
by not considering.
No, so a no vote is that they did not
That-
err.
That they did not err, that they did in fact consider it. And a vote yes would mean that they did not consider it and
That's
that they were
correct.
wrong.
God, that's,
Okay?
that's so bad. Okay.
All right.
That's fine.
Are we ready to vote?
We're ready to vote.
All right,
Okay.
Madam Clerk. Just go around, call the names, and we will tell you how we are voting.
Okay, and the order doesn't matter.
Order does not matter. I'm not proud.
No, his name starts with a G. He can go first.
Okay. Barker Chow,
Nate?
Robert Stewart,
no?
John Haxby.
No.
All right. Issue number 2. Did P&Z err by subjecting MEA's conditional use application to standards beyond those required under the code? And again, I would call for a motion that incorporates this issue.
You just do it just like it is.
I will help you. Mr. Hagsby? Give it a try.
All right.
You move that.
I move that planning and zoning did err by subjecting MEA's conditional use standards beyond qualified by municipal code.
All right. Thank you. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Stewart. Discussion. Mr. Hagsby?
And I'm not going to go, there are so many documents regarding this that I'm not going to get into the individual pinpoints of them because they're everywhere. They talk about setbacks. They talk about drainage. They talk about escrow accounts for future mitigation if there's a problem. I'm not convinced, looking at both the MEA's brief and the municipality's brief, that what the PNZ did was reasonable to Matanuska Electric Association. And they talked about specifically drainage. MEA came back with drainage plans, which were, in my opinion, as an engineer and a developer, more than adequate, stamped by a professional engineer, delivered, and in most likelihood would probably drain or better the drainage condition of the neighboring property. They overplanted by their landscaping plans. They fenced the stuff in. They have transformers that are probably quieter than the ones that were previously installed there. And then somebody came up with the grand idea of, potentially applying escrow accounts for unforeseen impacts. Again, I think a lot of this was just born out of frustration. It seemed evident kind of throughout the meetings that that they were frustrated. I think they did err, and I think that they subjected MEA to standards way above the code.
Okay. Mrs. Stewart.
I think John's encapsulated a lot of the generalities. I like the adding that requirement for a 50-foot, an additional 50-foot barrier or setback on the west boundary. I think they've added additional feet on one of the other boundaries so they can incorporate additional landscaping to try to cut the impact on the neighbors. And I don't think there's anything that requires them to make sure that the water drains away from that, from the neighboring land, but that the water that is collected on this particular site, so that it goes into a holding pond and it doesn't go onto the neighbor's properties. So those are significant things that have been done, along with the extra trees that they put in there and the gabions to raise it up an extra 8 feet. Those are all things. I know that there's some concern about some of the lighting, and there's other concerns about trying to negate any impact, but I don't think you can actually negate all of the impact of anything going in, because there was some impact anyway with the current use that was there. They had a light, they had a transformer. That transformer is going to be moved over to the east side. Next to us at Steffi's Lane, or Steffi's Road. That, along with the lower impact of a newer transformer, should cut down the noise. I don't think the noise is going to be a factor, if not a significant factor. I think there's a lot of conditions that have been met under the current code. And I think many of the conditions that were being tried to put into effect here were actually conditions that you would see under the new code. And I think there's some frustration because the people that were dealing with that in the new code requirements can see here's something that they would really like those new code requirements to comply with, but we have to apply the code requirements under the old code that was effective through the 31st of December 2013.
let me tell you that I analyzed this from an entirely different point of view. What this issue addresses is paragraph 5 of P&Z's findings of fact. And what paragraph 5 says is the following. The commission found that there were concerns that needed to be addressed that include providing a 50-foot setback, determining whether retaining wall is permitted within the required setback, limiting noise, etc., etc. They did not impose, the way this finding reads is, this did not impose those conditions. P&Z didn't say you must have a 50-foot setback. P&Z did not say you must do such and so regarding the drainage issue, or the lighting, or the noise, or the 8-foot. Remember, there was an issue over the, why in the world are you raising the pad by 8 feet? What paragraph 5 says is, those are concerns that need to be addressed more, and you have inadequately addressed those issues. Prime example is this 8-foot pad issue. It was Mulcahy who said to Mr. Adams, now why in the world do you have this, why do you raise this pad by 8 feet? Why don't you just lower it on the other side, and that way on the northwest side it's not going to be 8 feet in the air? And Adams had no answer to it. And Mulcahy was clearly frustrated by it, and he expressed it, and there's in the transcript you will find this. I wish you could address these issues. And that's really what paragraph 5 addresses. It doesn't say you must lower the pad by 8 feet, you must have a 50-foot setback. It said, these are concerns that we have raised, and you have not adequately addressed them. That's really what it is. And that harkens back to what Connie Nishimura said. Hey, you want us to vote this up or down? We'll give you an up or down vote. I wish you would ask for a continuance so that this can be sorted out a little bit more. But you don't want to do that. So, yes, we are going to vote it up or down, if that's what you want. They did not impose, specifically, they did not impose those additional things that were referred to in paragraph 5. So, as I read the appellant's brief, it is simply a red herring to say you imposed additional conditions. They did not impose additional conditions. They said you need to address these more, and you have inadequately addressed this. And we wish you would come back. But since you don't want to do that, we just have to vote on the basis of what you have presented.
Were the engineers there, or was it MEA alone?
There was Mr. Adams there, who is, I don't know what his background is. He was the MEA representative. There were there were Goodcher, who was an engineer, I believe.
Yes.
Who?
Norm Gucci.
Okay. And then there was somebody else there, as I recall.
Oh, Joe Griffith was there too.
Yeah, I don't know whether he's an engineer. But so there was at least one engineer there.
Well, let me ask you a question. Is that take the drainage issue?
Okay.
I'll pick one issue out of it.
Okay.
Is that I know that when the Muni has built roads by properties that we own, and the state has built roads by property that we own, they just say, the natural drainage was your way. And it's going to keep being your way. And we don't give a hoot. whether or not there's a problem or there's not a problem. Now, whether you stand an owner up who is MEA and you say, well, why don't you address this issue? Well, it appeared to me that it was addressed in the drawings and solved by an engineer in the drawings with a professional certified stamp. And that has to do with the drainage, to remove the drainage issues for the neighboring property. And with the landscaping, they over-landscaped. And so I think they more than addressed the issues that were required to be addressed. And it appears to me, whether you stand an owner up and say, well, why don't you address this? Well, he may not be the guy for that specific issue, that drainage issue that has the knowledge to address that particular piece. But as a planning and zoning person, you say, well, it's a stamp drawing. They say it will work. And so is it addressed or isn't? How much more, just because a bunch of people stand up and raise their hand and say, you haven't addressed this concern, I look at it and I say, well, it's a stamp drawing, it addresses a concern. That concern is addressed.
Well, first of all, what is required under the conditional use standards is not that they prevent all water from running from the pad. I mean, what the standard under the conditional use standards is you can't make it worse for the adjacent neighbors.
Right.
Okay? You can't make it worse. And what that means in terms of drainage is you got to make sure that the water that, let's say by a rainfall, falls on your lot, stays on your lot and goes in the ground or whatever, but doesn't drain off onto the neighboring property.
And I
Okay?
say
So that's
there's
basically it.
issue one. I say they met it.
Well, that's the question. You have the testimony of all kinds of people there. There was Debbie Osiander, there are the McNamara's, and there were others who said, your studies are flawed.
How do they know? They weren't engineers.
Well, wait a minute. And they pointed to specific facts that they believed caused the studies to be flawed. Okay? The commission listened to that and wanted what they wanted was they wanted a proper response from MEA. That's really what it was. And MEA was not in a position to respond at that time, at that hearing, to those specific issues raised by the people who testified. In other words, just because an engineer stamps something doesn't mean it is the word of God, as far as the commission is concerned. If there is public testimony that says, well, this is wrong and this is wrong, at least they can listen to it and they can say, yeah, they may have a point, they may not have a point, but you, applicant, you need to respond to this. And that's why it says in paragraph 5, there are problems with the drainage issue. As far as we're concerned, you need to address those. You need to, what you need to do is you need to respond to the specific allegations made in the public testimony. And that's what paragraph 5 says. It does not imply a new standard here. All it means is that you need to address that issue and you need to provide an answer to the concerns that have been raised. That's all.
And a stamp drawing doesn't fit that.
Because it did not respond, because the stamp drawing was done beforehand, before the public testimony that raised issues regarding that stamp plan.
So let me see if I understand what your theory would be. Your theory would be that if you come up with a building plan.
No, stay with the drainage issue. That's
well,
something I understand.
Well, that's fine. If you come up with a drainage plan
Yes.
that's been engineered for that site, and it's been stamped by an engineer, just because that engineer says that it is proper, and there are other people that aren't engineers that are coming in and they're saying, no, that's not true, that they have to go out and get another engineer and redo it again?
No. but it would seem to me that the applicant has to respond. And the way, as a lawyer, the way you do that is that you get that engineer out there to say, no, you've heard, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Baron, you're fired.
God, I thought my phone is dead. I don't know how to turn this off. I hope I did. And the way you do that as a lawyer is that you get the engineer and then you say,
You grill them.
you grill him. Couldn't be done. Engineer wasn't there. MEA wasn't in a position to respond. And specifically, the allegation was in the public testimony, the reason this engineer's report is flawed is because it is based on incorrect assumptions. For example, the boreholes. I don't know if you remember that. You know, the boreholes are in the wrong were done in the wrong location. They were done in a spot where it's dry, not where it's wet. Has nothing to do with where this pad is actually going to be and causes an impact. And that's why the study that was done and that was stamped later on is based on false premises. That's really the allegation. And MEA should have been in a position to respond to that. And they weren't.
Well,
You see, that's the problem. And it comes back to MEA's unwillingness to have the matter continued so that they could respond to it. That's really the crux of this. And as we have, just a second, let me just finish my thought. And as we have said before, what permeates the entire record of this case is a frustration
oh yes.
by P&Z with MEA that they really dropped the ball and that they were not willing to go back and see if there were alternatives that could
Placate the
fix
neighbors.
some of the concerns that had been raised. And we haven't even talked about the main, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the 800-pound gorilla that's in the room, and that is that everybody says this project is too big for the site. That by itself, to my way of thinking, sinks this entire application, but we are not there.
We'll get
Mr.
there.
Stewart.
Was P&Z bound to make that decision that they did, or did they have other options? Could they have continued on their own and had MEA come back with those answers?
Legally? God, I don't know. What you do is, when you sit on these boards, and I can only tell you on the basis of my experience of having sat on a land use planning board before, that you defer to the applicant and you say, you have seen the responses here, we are perfectly willing to give you a continuance, but if you don't want a continuance, we're just going to vote on the basis of what we have. Whether they can continue it even though the applicant doesn't want that, I think that would be, I'm not sure that it's legally not possible, but it is. That's
Otherwise,
essentially not what you do.
yeah, otherwise it almost looks like they're letting MEA make the decision for them, rather than they make the decision based on what they see.
Well, you see what, I'm not sure what you're getting at. P&Z wanted more answers from MEA. And MEA essentially said, we've had, this is as far as we were willing to go. There was some testimony that they walked out of some public meeting, apparently in a huff. And it appeared to me from reading the record that that's essentially the position that MEA was in here.
But
And
now-
that is that, hey, we've done a lot, we're not willing to do anymore, this is it.
But now the MEA says it met code. Excuse me, the MOA says it met code.
Remember,
The municipality of Anchorage came,
Yes.
they said, this meets code, and that's why there was a
but-
recommendation.
but remember, the municipality is an adversary in this, at this point, okay?
Well, but yeah, but
And
they
P&Z
weren't.
is independent of the municipality.
Sure, P&Z is independent of the municipality, but the municipality okay, and I've had some dealings with them, and this particular department, adversarial meetings with them, but the Muni came back and they said, this meets the code. What they proposed meets the code. We've reviewed it in depth. It meets the code.
And P and Z said there
No,
are.
it doesn't. We hear too many people complaining. We want to know.
And we have questions on our own that you, our MEA applicant, are not willing to address.
Or do you suspect that maybe MEA was frustrated too? What the hell?
Of course they were.
It's a conditional use permit for, we're trying to help the people in the neighborhood, not screw them. Is that what, when getting the particular MOA approval for this, okay, getting them to come back and say drainage, it meets it. Okay, that's a big thing. That's a huge, huge, huge thing.
Okay.
Because they're experts in this. They've seen what water damage does. They don't care what their water does to somebody else's property, but they care what one person impacts another person. MOA, Municipality of Anchorage, came back and said, we've reviewed it, it meets code. Now from a P&Z position, normally, and that's why I'm surprised that this is such a big deal, is that normally when the municipality comes up and says, look, we reviewed it, meets it, we recommend approval, which they did in this case. Normally P&Z says, has a little bit of a discussion here, a little bit of a discussion there, and then they approve. That's normal. And frustration, yeah, there were obviously people that were angry and voicing opinions,
No, are you talking about people who testified, or are you talking about P and Z commissioners?
I'm talking that P&Z commissioners were obviously frustrated, whether it was because of public testimony that raised additional questions or not, I don't know. But the municipality of Anchorage came back in and said it met code. And without trying to dissect the code with respect to that drainage, with respect to that stuff, I'm implied to, I would be inclined to agree with it. It met code. And I would be inclined to say that, P&Z erred.
Well, let's come back to the motion. And the motion is, did P and Z err by subjecting MEA's conditional use application to standards beyond those required under the code? And we are specifically, and that's what the appellant is referring to, we're specifically referring to paragraph 5 of P and Z's resolution. You have it in front of you. And that simply says, the commission found that there were concerns that needed to be addressed. It doesn't say the commission found that you didn't comply with the following considerations. What it says is, those are concerns that were raised, and those are concerns that P&Z had that need further addressing. And MEA, you did not address those.
Is it a requirement that they do address them? Is it truly a requirement? How much money are you going to make somebody spend?
Well, if they want a conditional use permit, they better satisfy the concerns that the commission has, as far as I'm concerned, because it's the commission that issues the conditional use permit.
Well, is it the concerns that need to be addressed, or is it the code? Let's
Well,
boil that down. Is it the concerns, or is it the code?
It is the code. And here's what the code says. Furthers the goals of the comprehensive plan? Does it conform to the standards for that title and regulations? Will it be compatible with existing and planned uses in the surrounding neighborhood? Will it not have permanent negative impact on the items listed in the subsection, and then it talks about a variety of of issues, among them drainage, water, noise, light, all of those.
So the
Okay.
the municipality of Anchorage said, yes, it meets it.
The planning department said.
Right.
Yes.
Right? But the municipality of Anchorage recommendation to P and Z was.
The
it meets-
recommendation was yes,
It meets it.
and P and Z is not convinced that it meets it. That's basically what it
So
boils down.
so in effect, they substituted their own judgment. P and Z substituted their own judgment over and above the,
The decision is
Planning
made by P and Z.
right. But,
The decision is not made by the municipality. The municipality is simply a party.
right, and they're the people that make the recommendation to or not to.
Correct.
Got it, okay.
And
perfect.
so, and essentially, P and Z did not follow that recommendation.
Right, they substituted their own judgment.
Well, they simply said, yes, they substituted, we need to be careful here because that has legal implications when you say that.
Okay.
But what, they simply said, we're not convinced that the Muni is correct here.
We don't believe you.
No, they didn't say we don't believe it. We are not convinced that that's true. There are some issues that have been raised that haven't been addressed to our satisfaction.
Okay.
That's what they're saying.
Okay, so I think I'm pretty clear on
So
what I would, how I
From a
would.
Okay.
technical standpoint, then, what they did is that they just expressed concerns. They didn't make a
Correct.
finding.
They made no findings here. Paragraph 5
No, but
does
they
not
denied.
concern any findings.
But this supports part of the reason why they denied the application.
It is subordinate, in my view. It's totally subordinate to a finding number 3. The
Well, but
commission-
we're only on issue 2 here, Barry. Let's nail this down.
It
to
is
issue 2.
subordinate. What I'm saying is, paragraph 5, in my view, is simply subordinate to one of the other paragraphs. And it is simply a recital of the concerns that were voiced.
So it's really a gratuitous,
It's gratuitous. To my way of thinking, it's gratuitous.
But it was preemptive to the decision. I mean, if they basically,
I think it's
they-
supportive, not
It's
preemptive.
supportive, it's not preemptive at all.
it's supportive of the decision. Yes,
Correct.
Supporting the denial.
Yes, correct.
So it's basically supporting the denial. They're saying, we don't believe it, because
No,
there
they
are
didn't
other,
say-
well, I understand, but.
No, they didn't say we don't believe it.
Well, but in their testimony, in the various areas of the testimony, they're saying, we don't believe it, because people are saying, no, that's not correct, the boreholes were in the wrong position, or the geotechnical work was not done properly, or a variety of factors. So, based on what I've heard, on what I've heard, I'm reminded of similar types of muni decisions where stamp drawings come in and they say, well, no, this isn't gonna fit. And so, as I look at this, I would be inclined to say P and Z did err.
That they,
They did err.
well, wait a minute. That's not,
They
they
subjected
erred
it,
by subjecting MEA's
conditional
conditional
use.
use application to
to
additional
standards.
standards not required by the code.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, any further discussion?
Well, it looks at, as it goes back to fact finding number 5. 5 itself is really not a finding. But they want this addressed, so what they're envisioning is that they're envisioning another application.
That's really, I think if you read between the lines, I think that's what it is.
They want to see more.
Yes. I think that's why paragraph 5 was stuck in there, I must tell you. Because it is totally immaterial for purposes of the decision. as I read it.
I think it's integral to the decision. I mean, I look at it and I say to myself, I say to myself, you know, when I did a property, somebody
Well,
expressed a concern that they wanted a sidewalk onto our property coming from a state or a city road. Okay, well, that's nice, you'd like that. That's nice you have that concern, but by God, come on, when's enough enough?
Well, let me just come back to, in response to that, Mr. Hagsby, and just refer to the pad issue. You know, it was Commissioner Mulcahy, the chairman, who said, looking at this, why don't you just lower the pad by 8 feet? They had no answer to it, okay? MEA essentially had no answer to that question because it was a huge issue as far as the McNamara's were concerned, because suddenly they were going to look at this structure way up there. So the natural question is, why can't you lower the pad? Well, apparently that had never occurred to MEA. Well, they were not prepared to respond as to why that could or could not be done. So paragraph 5, in specific response to that, doesn't say you must lower the pad by 8 feet. All it says is there's a concern that needs to be addressed. Pursuing the possibility of lowering the pad to the elevation of the west property boundary with installation of drainage improvements. That's all it says. It doesn't say you must lower the pad by 8 feet. It doesn't say that.
Well, so does that mean that they have to go, in order to fit the engineer, the drainage engineer's stuff that he's got to keep the flow of water from being fast?
No.
No, but does that mean, Aaron, does that mean that the engineer did the work on it? It was incorrect? He stamped them.
Well,
He stamped them. I mean, I look at this and I say to
I
myself,
understand.
even if there's there are lots of times there are concerns, but does every concern have to be addressed for conditional use?
Well, they need to be able to respond to questions that are raised about it, and the engineer needs to be able to defend why he stamped it, it seems to me. And so when there's the allegation, hey, your report is based on the wrong underlying study, he needs to be able to say either, yeah, that's very true, I proceeded on an improper assumption, or he says, no, my assumptions were correct, and the old study here, the 2010 boreholes and all that stuff, it's perfectly valid, and here's the reason why, and then he continues. We're not in a position to do that. I don't want to belabor the point.
Okay.
I feel that paragraph 5 is not a paragraph 5 does not refer to requirements. It merely says you need to address these so that we can better understand and make a better decision. That's, to me, what paragraph 5 says. And so it does not establish new standards. I agree with you, there's no standard in the code that says you must lower the pad, or you cannot, or your drainage plan is absolutely correct, or incorrect, whatever it is. That's not in the code. It simply talks in terms of the general standards for conditional use permit. Whatever you're planning, you cannot make it worse. And so the
Right.
question is worse for the neighbors. And so the question is, what you have proposed right now, the pad 8 feet high, that makes it worse for the neighbors. Is there some way that you can accommodate that?
Is there an elevation requirement under the code?
No,
Did
but
the-
maybe there is.
Did
but-
the municipality of Anchorage point out an elevation issue when they made the
There-
recommendation?
There are no standards for
Precise.
substation.
There are no standards for a lot of
For a
things
lot of things.
in a conditional use. So MEA first has to go to MOA and say, this is what we're planning, here's generally what it is, here's the design, here are the standards for elevations, this is what's beside us. These are the drainage studies that we did, they have to do. And does this meet you? And it's a system of negotiation between the MOA and MEA. Back and forth, it goes back and forth like that all the time until the MOA is satisfied.
But that's not the end of the process, because then they have to go to P&Z
Yeah, so, and
and
the
persuade P&Z,
and-
regardless of what the Muni says.
And the PNC are not the engineers.
But they are the board that decides.
Gotcha, okay, well, I
Okay.
could vote on what we got.
Would it make it easier if we referred in the motion to the finding of fact in A5, as specified in A5? Because then we're addressing A5 on its own. And it's just a concern.
Ms. Kuzco?
I think you can revise the motion like that if you want.
It would be by way, you made the motion. No, Mr. Haxby
I made the motion.
So the question is whether he's willing to
I
amend that motion.
don't think I'm willing to amend it. That could be a separate motion to address that separately if that's possible. But but otherwise we're going to tie PNC's finding of fact 5, which doesn't tie in, to me, to issue 2. I say, I'm talking about, did they err in subjecting them to standards beyond those required under municipal code?
Okay,
That's all my motion is about. Did they err?
well then, maybe we need to go back and say, how did this issue come about? It is based on the appellant's brief. And if you look at the appellant's brief, that's specifically what it talks about. If you look at page 7 of 25, capital B, the appellant entitled that portion of its argument as, quote, "The commission acted arbitrarily by subjecting MEA's conditional use application to standards beyond those authorized by the code." Okay? That's what they entitle this portion of their brief. And then when you go through it to the next pages, you will find that they referred specifically to paragraph 5. It says, the commission imposed greater yard requirements, that's the 50-yard setback in paragraph 5. Okay. On the next page, it says, second, the commission decision implies MEA's drainage plan. That refers to paragraph 5.
Where does it say in here that this is regarding paragraph 5?
It doesn't, but that's the only paragraph in which the drainage issue was raised.
Okay, so basically there's an implication that.
Correct.
That section B refers to paragraph 5.
Yes,
So it's implied.
it is implied.
Okay, that it's not stated.
I agree,
Okay, so.
but it is clearly implied.
So it's implied but not stated?
Yes.
Okay, I'm unwilling to change my motion.
Okay. All right. Mr. Stewart is still reading.
Okay, if we're referring to only finding 5, A5, then
If you wish to have the limitation imposed in the motion, in the currently pending motion, you need to make a motion to amend the currently pending motion.
John, is there anything else in here besides 5 that you're referring to?
I do not want to put 5 in there because it's implied, it's not stated in the appellant's brief. There's an implication of it, I'll admit. but I see nothing that's stated in there that ties it to that. There, what the appellant is stating is there were standards above and beyond the code that were imposed upon us. The muni said we met code, we provided the stuff to code, P&Z tried to make it more than that. Regardless whether finding of fact 5 is, it's just not stated in here. It's not referred to in here. The only thing that the appellant is saying is, look, here are the codes they said that they wanted to impose greater conditions on us than necessary. So that's why I'm saying I don't want to go back in there and try and reconstruct it based upon an implication. You know, I mean, I'm not, we're dealing basically with a bunch of legal issues here at this point. If it goes further, it's going to go into a court of law. So we're talking about implication versus it being expressed directly.
What might
Please
help,
go.
yeah, what might help is if you pointed to where P&Z subjected MEA to standards that aren't in 5. Like, you're.
Well, then I'm making the reach between the appellant's brief and 5.
Well, I think to support your theory, though, just if you can explain what items that aren't in 5, if you're not relying on 5, where do you find that the error occurred? What standards were imposed?
I'll just pick one right off the top of my head, an escrow account.
Well, you're
And
talking
where-
about 5.
And where is that? That is in
I-
number 5. Is it
I'm-
anywhere
what-
else?
No, what I'm saying is that, what I've said is that
Where
this
is it?
is, finding of fact number 5 is in the background of our document. Okay, and issue number 2 of the appellant's brief has strictly to do with conditions imposed upon them greater than required by code.
And where in the resolution do you find that? In the resolution that was,
Why are we considering the resolution? Number
because
5?
that's what controls, that's what was appealed. So where, in addition to paragraph 5, do you find that there were conditions imposed on MEA that exceed the standards for conditional use?
The municipality,
No,
No,
I'm
no.
talking about the resolution.
the resolution itself says unless you, basically, unless there are concerns, unless you address them, no. That's what resolution 5 says. Okay, but to get to resolution 5, they imposed additional standards on them. That's what they did. The municipality said it met code. So this decision was as a result of, we don't believe that you meet code. That's what the resolution, that's why it's there. That's why they said no.
But where, in addition to paragraph 5, does it talk about additional considerations or additional conditions that have been imposed? Look at the resolution, please.
Baron, it's not required to see the stretch between the conditions that the P&Z wanted to put on these people, on MEA, and it's not a stretch between a denial and the conditions that they considered. No, we're not going to do it. In spite of the fact that Muni says it meets code, you haven't addressed concerns. They addressed the concerns of the Muni. Why are we getting into, I mean, I don't see that was, resolution 5 was basically the end decision after considering all the things that they said MEA didn't do. MEA didn't meet. And what I'm saying is that the Muni said it met code. And I agree with it.
Okay. But did they, and so your view is that paragraph 5 imposes additional standards?
It's an additional requirement. It basically says until you meet these other concerns, which are not requirements under the code, until you meet these other concerns, we're not going to give it to you.
But that's not what it says.
Read
That's
it
not what
again.
number 5 says.
Read it again.
It says, the commission found that there were concerns that needed to be addressed. That's all it says.
Okay, and I say that's erroneous.
That these were not concerns that needed to be addressed?
The commission found that there were concerns that needed to be addressed.
Yes.
They may have found that it needed to be addressed, but the Muni didn't.
Yeah, but the Muni is not the one that makes the decision, it's P&Z that makes the decision.
Well, they may make the decision to say yes or no, but they may not be the ultimate decider. That's why it's here.
But they are the ultimate decider. They made the decision.
Oh, they did. They made a decision. I say they're in error. I say they imposed additional standards. And that's how we got to that decision.
Okay. Any further discussion, Mr. Stewart?
Well, it would clarify it for me a lot more, or easier, if we just referenced 5. But as it stands now, we're talking about 5 anyway.
To my way of thinking, the answer is yes, because that is the only place where those issues are addressed that the appellant viewed as exceeding the standards established by the conditional use ordinance.
So you're linking the two.
Well, it's the only place where there's any discussion about it. There's no other paragraph where that discussion occurs. So it's got to be paragraph 5.
Other than in the record.
No, we're talking about the decision. Where in the decision does it say they imposed additional standards?
But to get to the decision, they did. To get to that decision, they imposed additional standards on it.
Well, I think we are talking at cross purposes. Any further discussion, Mr. Stewart?
No, this is a technicality right here.
Okay. Are we ready to vote,
Yeah.
Mr. Stewart? Or do you want further discussion?
Okay, the motion is,
The motion is P&Z erred by subjecting MEA's conditional use application to standards beyond those required under the code.
okay. It's,
May I discuss further?
Well, just a second, Mr. Stewart has the floor.
so it's, these are concerns then, they're not explicit standards. So I think what they're trying to do is to get this back in with these concerns addressed. And then we'll be able to determine after that whether or not they actually will or will not impose additional standards or increase standards.
May I
Yes.
respond to that?
Mr. Haxby?
Did they err by subjecting their conditional use application, not the decision? We're not talking about the decision. Did they err by subjecting their conditional use application to standards? It's not the decision. Was it their application that was subjected to standards beyond those required under municipal code? Not the decision. It's implied. It's implied, but it's not stated. So based upon that, I'll vote.
With that in mind, wouldn't you also then include the statements that they have a public process, and they said that public process really didn't occur.
That's a separate issue,
Yeah, it's a separate issue.
and we will address that later.
Okay. All right, I'm ready to address this as a technical issue.
Okay. Madam Clerk, wait a minute. Before you state that, let me just repeat so that we have it all very firmly in our heads. The motion is P&Z erred by subjecting MEA's conditional use application to standards beyond those required under the code. The vote in favor of that motion will find that P&Z subjected it to additional standards not found and not required under the code. The vote against the motion will find, or will say that it is not true that P&Z imposed standards not required by the code. Hope I addressed this.
Clear it up.
Correctly.
One more time, Aaron, go ahead.
All right, so if you vote in favor of it, you are saying P&Z erred by imposing additional standards in rendering its decision. If you vote against the motion, you say no, P&Z did not impose additional standards.
Okay.
How do you vote? Baird Goodchow?
Nope.
Robert Stewart?
No?
John Haxby?
Yes.
The motion passes, the motion fails by a vote of 2-1. Should we take a break?
Yes.
Is it desired? Or do we want to go a little further? We have 6 issues here to consider. Do we want to do one more before we take a break? I think the other ones will require less time. Mr. Stewart, would you like a break or do you want to continue?
I think we can continue.
Okay, Mr. Haxby?
I think we can continue.
All right.
And just get some water.
All right, we will plug along.
Okay. Let me just grab some water.
Okay.
Okay, good to go.
All right. Issue number 3 was P&Z's finding that MEA's mitigation measures were insufficient, supported by substantial evidence. And in terms of a motion, that would mean that it would have to be moved that P&Z's finding that MEA's mitigation measures were insufficient were not supported by substantial evidence. Were or were not, I don't care which way you want to go on. May I have a motion, please?
Okay. Was Planning and Zoning Commission's finding, I move that Planning and Zoning Commission's finding that MEA's mitigation measures were not sufficiently supported in the record by substantial evidence.
Okay. And Mr. Haxby, do you want to second that or should I second it?
You go ahead and say.
All right, I will second. Did you say we're not sufficiently supported?
Not sufficiently supported.
All right. Mr. Stewart. If you want to defer,
Well,
do you want to go ahead and speak to your motion?
can I defer?
Sure. I seconded the motion, so I will speak to it. I do not intend to support that motion because I believe this was sufficiently supported in the record. This motion relates to finding of fact number 3. Finding of fact number 3 reads, the commission found that the substation met some of the conditional use standards. However, the scale of the proposed substation was too large for the size of the petition site, and the mitigation measures proposed were not sufficient to adequately buffer surrounding residential uses. Regarding the insufficiency of mitigation, there was discussion regarding the lighting, and that is found at page 99. There was discussion regarding noise mitigation, and that's found on pages 87 and 99. There was significant discussion regarding the drainage at pages 56 through 61, at pages 87 through 88, and page 93. The landscaping was addressed pages 30 through 36 and at page 71. So there was significant discussion regarding mitigation measures. But P&Z did not state in this paragraph what was insufficient. We know what they deemed as requiring further attention, and those other matters that we've already now discussed ad infinitum, it seems to me, regarding paragraph 5. But to me, there is sufficient discussion in the record regarding the mitigation measures that the statement in paragraph 3 is in fact correct, and that the commissioners expressed the view that the mitigation measures proposed so far were not sufficient to adequately buffer the surrounding residential uses. And for that reason, I would vote against the motion. Mr. Stewart, was that helpful or not?
You would vote against the motion,
Indeed.
meaning
The motion was that they were not
Not
sufficiently
supported, and I'm saying that's incorrect because they were sufficiently supported in the record.
There's significant information in here, in the record, that they did a lot of mitigation. They went beyond what was required by the current code. Both in setting up the gabions and the extra trees, the extra work that they've gone in and they're planning on doing. Some of it may already have been done. But it does look like there's substantial evidence in the record that supports that there is sufficient to say that they've conducted sufficient mitigation.
But I'm not sure that's the gist of the motion. The gist of the motion was P&Z's finding that MEA's mitigation measures were insufficient. Is that supported by substantial evidence? Yes, no. That's the issue. Mr. Heck, I'm sorry. Mr. Stewart,
I think it's
finish what
just
you're
the
saying.
opposite.
Okay. Mr. Hexman.
So, as I understand what you're thinking, is it the record says they went above and beyond. Is that what you're thinking about?
MEA's, Yeah.
Application went above and beyond, and they did what they were supposed to do. They did what they could do. So, in fact, their mitigation measures were adequate. I mean,
yeah, just the opposite of the motion.
Yeah, just the opposite of the motion, so that they were adequate. So it's just the opposite of the motion.
No.
Hmm?
Now, that's what he's saying. That's what he said.
What he is, it's different from the motion. What he is saying is that MEA's mitigation measures were sufficient, but that was not recognized by P&Z.
Okay?
I think that's what he is saying.
That's what you're saying.
But that is not the motion. The motion is, was P&Z's finding in paragraph 3 that MEA's mitigation measures were insufficient, is that supported by substantial evidence? In other words, is there substantial evidence in the record to support P&Z's decision that the mitigation measures as they affect the neighbors were insufficient?
And you're saying, Bob, no. The record indicates there were more than enough mitigation measures.
Yeah, I don't think that there was substantial evidence in the record that would show that there was insufficient.
And I would agree.
Okay.
And this is a factual finding, so if you want to substitute, you're supposed to defer to the findings of planning and zoning if there is substantial evidence to support it, or you can, by a 2/3 vote to substitute your independent judgment on the factual finding.
Or it could be sent back.
Right.
Meaning more money, so.
No, we're not talking about money, we're simply talking about sending it back. Remanding it. But first, we need to address the motion all by itself.
Okay, so
Let me,
back up, excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
Maybe you could back up and replay what you just said.
okay,
What I just
Yeah,
said?
yes, please.
Since this is a finding of fact, which the other ones were legal issues, this is a factual issue, you're supposed to defer to the judgment of planning and zoning if there is substantial evidence to support it, unless you choose to substitute your own judgment, which takes a 2/3 vote of this board. So if you believe there is evidence in the record to support the finding that the measures were insufficient, but you want to substitute your own judgment that the measures were not insufficient, you would do that by substituting your judgment with a 2/3 vote.
Okay, so, Bob, you think that you think effectively that they met the standard. And so,
On part of it. But if you look at the finding of fact in 3, there's another issue there in the very beginning that I'm not comfortable addressing because I don't think it was actually addressed.
which was?
It's too large.
Oh, that's coming up, that's the
That's
next
coming up.
that's the
issue.
next one. That is the
That's
we're
next,
looking
issue
at-
number
that's the
4,
next-
so,
that's the next issue.
Okay, so we're only dealing with the mitigation portion of 3.
Yes,
That's correct.
that is correct.
So would you, Bob?
Yeah, I would be comfortable in saying that the record
Is sufficient.
is sufficient by, and that there's substantial evidence in the record that shows MEA met the mitigation measures.
So does he have to take and revise his thing, or does he have to say we want to substitute judgment? Or
No, that would be, if the motion passes, that is the next issue that obviously will have to be raised, and that is, having said yes, P&Z, P&Z's findings were not, I'm getting wrapped around the axle
You're
here.
getting wrapped around the legal axle here, apparently.
That's right.
Maybe you need the break.
I think the confusion is that finding number 3 says that the mitigation measures were insufficient. And so the first question is that finding supported in the record
By
by substantial evidence?
Okay, so.
yes, no.
So I guess what we want to do is vote on that and make a motion as to whether we substitute judgment.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's go. Bob, are you comfortable with voting on your thing,
Well,
your motion?
and that is, again, the pending motion is P&Z's finding that MEA's mitigation measures were insufficient are not supported, were not sufficiently supported by the record.
Okay, so let's talk about what the yay or nay is. Yay is equal to what?
All right. Yea means that the finding by P&Z of insufficient mitigation is not supported by the record. The vote of nay means the finding by P&Z that the mitigation measures were insufficient is supported by the record.
Okay, so if you say, let me see if I can summarize in non-legal words.
Yes, please.
So if we say yes, that means we think they met the standard.
Mm,
Or we think that there were adequate mitigation measures.
No, what it means is that the finding of insufficient mitigation measures is not supported by the record.
Okay, so,
In other words, the record does not support P&Z's finding that the mitigation measures were insufficient.
got it, okay.
That's what a yes vote means.
Okay,
And a no vote means that the record is sufficient to support P&Z's finding that the mitigation measures were insufficient.
gotcha. Bob, do you understand that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we are ready to vote.
How do you vote, Bernd Kirchhoff?
No,
Robert Stewart?
Yay.
John Haxby?
Yay.
all right. The motion passes by a vote of 2 to 1. We now need to decide what we do. We can either substitute our own judgment, and there being 3 of us, it is a simple majority, although the code says it needs to be a 2/3 majority, but that's just,
We're there anyway.
we're there anyway, okay?
Could
So
I make
we
a
can
motion then?
support, we can change that part of the board's decision, or we can send it back for further resolution by the board.
Okay. I'd like to make a
Yes,
motion.
Mr. Hagsby.
I'd like to make a motion that we substitute judgment, please.
And what is that judgment?
That,
Put it in forms of a motion, please.
I'd like to make a motion
That we
that
substitute
we substitute
our own judgment.
our own judgment that MEA's mitigation measures were sufficiently supported in the record.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Mr. Hagsby.
MEA's mitigation measures were reviewed and approved by the municipality of Anchorage. was it the planning department? Who were the ones that actually did? Planning department reviewed this stuff. As is customary, it probably was negotiated back and forth. That may not be in the record, but municipality supported it. They reviewed it. And MEA's plans were provided by stamped engineers, or sort of, by degreed engineers. And that's enough.
Mr. Stewart?
It looks to me like there's significant evidence, substantial evidence in the record that their mitigation measures were sufficient to address the problems that might be created by this new addition, or by the increasing the size, or, not increasing the size, but expanding it. And I think there's, as you go through the record, I think there's significant mitigation measures that have been put in place in the plan for that facility. And I think that they will be adequate.
You want to address, for the purposes of writing a finding, specific mitigation measures in the record that you want to have referred to?
I think you need to. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just look at something quickly here.
You go here.
Were you looking for specific pages in the record?
Or at least the specific
Issues.
items that you
Okay.
felt they showed that in the record, because your independent substituted judgment needs to be supported in the
By
record by
substantial
evidence.
evidence.
And so I wanted you to try to refer to specific areas of mitigation, like lighting, drainage, landscaping, noise, any of those
Okay.
items that you feel supports your decision.
The lighting has maintenance lighting, that's low-level lighting, and that there is additional lighting that will be used when they are conducting active maintenance. But that's going to be short-lived. So the low-level security lighting that is in there is in fact going to be low-level. Now, it may not address the concern of someone that has their window open looking at light. But I think that they have tried to minimize the light pollution. I think they've been able to do that with low-level lighting. The noise, I think that by moving the transformers to the east side of the site, that moves one transformer from the west to the east, the one that's presently there. The new one going in provides less noise than the one that's already there. also the fact that they're both further away from the primary neighboring facility there should adequately mitigate the noise. The drainage as it currently exists in the plan looks like it does a good job of collecting water that comes off the site and letting it percolate down through the substrate. And then anything that percolates out and it goes away from, according to the plan, away from the neighbor that's on the northwest, that goes to a holding area. And it effectively should keep the water from that site from going onto that northwest property. So I don't think there's a negative impact on that property itself. I don't know if this will actually drain that property in addition to the drainage that comes off the site. The landscaping is significantly higher because the plans called for the medians to provide 8 feet in that northwest corner and sloping back to the east. They're going to put 10-foot trees. They don't have to put all 10-foot trees back there on that on the north side. There are more trees than is required by code. The trees should be able to provide year-round mitigation of any activity from that particular site. And as the trees grow, that mitigation becomes, it increases with time. So I think with those items in mind, I think there is sufficient mitigation.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Axby.
The other things that they've talked about with respect to lighting is doing their maintenance primarily in the summer when maintenance lighting would be imperceptible. And as I understand it, security lighting is only provided at the entrance, which is far away from the adjoining landowners' property. Probably would appear similar to a standard light pole. Noise pollution. They talked about using new transformers. I'm familiar with transformers themselves. New transformers, they say, are significantly quieter. That's in the record. A professional engineer had determined that audible noise is not anticipated to exceed what exists presently at site. So basically, a professional engineer designed it and stamped it. And they said that the planning division confirmed no noise complaints had been filed against the existing substation itself. Drainage. With respect to the drainage situation, the plan that they put together include crushed rock over compacted gravel and perforated pipe down below. It was done by a certified engineer, professional engineer, stamped, and in my experience, probably is, in fact, more than adequate. And that's also in the record as well. They've also planned for a 100-year, 24-hour storm event. And all that precipitation would be collected on site. Collected and carried to an infiltration basin on the property's north side. It's in the record on page 82 of the drainage report provided by MEA. And in fact, it appears in the record at pages 79 through 92 that they did base the drainage system on more than just geotech data obtained. They based it on topography, in addition to boreholes, which were 49 feet, which is more than I've ever seen on a property like that. Landscaping. They exceeded buffer landscaping requirements, which supports two different uses side by side. So I think that the record is completely adequate.
Okay. Let me address this a little bit more. I don't think I'm in a position to support this. Apparently, not apparently, but this motion addresses paragraph 3 of the Commission's findings, which starts out by saying, the Commission found that the substation meets some of the conditional use standards. Don't say which ones they meet. They're not required to under the ordinance because they eventually voted it down anyway, but it would have been helpful. And to my way of thinking, it is essential that they enunciate which standards were met. Because the paragraph then continues, however, the scale of the proposed substation was too large for the size of the petition site, and the mitigation measures proposed were not sufficient to adequately buffer the surrounding residential uses. Does the last portion, the reference to the lack of mitigation measures, does that relate to the scale of the building, of the proposed substation remodeling? Or does it relate to the entire situation? In other words, I cannot tell from paragraph 3 what mitigation measures were insufficient. And consequently, I find, as a reviewing board, as an appeal board, I'm very hesitant to substitute my own judgment for that of P&Z. There are 8 or 9 people there. They were there. They voted 8-1, I believe it was, or 6-1. There was only one person in opposition, and only one person who supported the application as it stood. I'm very hesitant to support my one judgment here for that of all of the other people who were there, the commissioners. What I would prefer, and so for that reason, I would like to know more why they made the statement. Number one, that there were some mitigation measures that were adequate. But there were others that were not listed. Neither one of them was listed. So rather than substitute my own judgment for that of the commission, it would be my druthers that we send it back and say, make specific findings to explain your statement that some of the conditional use standards were met, but that mitigation measures, what were you referring to when you said the mitigation measures were not sufficient to adequately buffer the surrounding residential uses? Did that specifically refer to the scale of the proposed substation?
That's under issue 4, Baird.
No. I'm looking at the sentence. The scale was too large for the size of the petition site and the mitigation measures proposed were not sufficient to adequately buffer. Does the statement or the finding that the mitigation measures proposed were not sufficient to adequately buffer the surrounding residential uses, does that refer strictly to the scale of the proposed substation, or does that refer also to other unnamed standards? And if it refers to other unnamed standards, you need to verbalize which standards were not adequately mitigated. Okay, so for that reason, I'm not in favor of that motion and I'll vote against. Mr. Haxby.
The appellant's position is, it has to do with mitigation. We're going to deal with scale in another, under issue number 4. And so the mitigation issues that I think I would be less inclined to send it back to them. They're already angry enough about this, as I can see it. And I think that what we're dealing with here is lighting, noise, drainage, landscaping. And so from that perspective, I'd support your motion to substitute our objection so they met.
Further discussion, Mr. Stewart?
Well, I can see your point that it's looking at what standards. If we say that we've met all the mitigation, then we have met all the standards that they imposed, but we don't know which standards were good and which ones were not. So I think he's got a good point. But this, I didn't see anything in the record that says that the scale of that particular facility would not fit
Well, we come to that.
in that.
We come to that in
We
number
come
4.
to that in the next.
Yeah, but
That's
I know,
separate from mitigation.
That is a
Bob.
separate issue.
but it's linked in here because if the scale is different, then the mitigation is going to apply to that scale. And if the mitigation, if the scale is actually too large for that actual physical site, and it doesn't fit, and I didn't look at the drawings and everything, and I don't know if anybody did, to see whether or not the scale that they had on the drawings would actually fit within the physical space of that particular lot.
Well,
So it's almost like we're, which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Mr. Haxby.
The muni addressed it. The municipality of Anchorage said that we're going to come to issue number 4, which is the scale. That's separate from the
Yeah.
mitigation issues. It's separate, in my mind, it is separate from the scale of the project. Mitigation has to do with flooding the neighbors with too much light. Mitigation has to do with keeping the drainage from your property from going onto their property. Mitigation has to do with putting in more landscaping that is necessary, and in this case, over and above. They put in to mitigate any impacts on the neighboring properties. So from my perspective, you're correct. That lighting, noise, drainage, and landscaping, there was effective mitigation by MEA. Scale we'll deal with separately. that would be my opinion, is to deal with it separately. Municipality of Anchorage, in fact, found that their mitigation issues of these four, they're standing here, lighting, noise, drainage, and landscaping, they were met. And in everything that I can see here, they've met those issues. Scale is a separate issue. And I'm willing to deal with it on that basis, Bob.
But the difficulty is the language of paragraph 3. The scale of the proposed subdivision was too large for the size of the petition site, and the mitigation measures proposed were not sufficient to adequately buffer the surrounding residential uses. Was it the mitigation measures relating to the size? Or was it the mitigation measures relating to the entire project? Regardless of size.
Well,
You see, that's,
I understand what you're saying, but irrespective of that.
I don't understand what they're referring to.
Irrespective of that, MEA has gone overboard on the drainage stuff. I can tell you what, putting that drainage stuff in there, the amount of drainage stuff they've done by putting in that much gravel, that much, crushed rock to absorb all of the oncoming water, that's expensive as can be. And so from what I'm looking at here is that, typically when people go in and they do stuff like this, the type of measures that they put in place here, say just for drainage, would be, you might do that if you had a completely paved site where all the water ran off into a ditch, and then they were trying to suck all that water out of it. So I look at this stuff and I say, they've gone overboard on their mitigation measures for a site that's not even paved. They've gone overboard in landscaping, they've gone overboard on their lighting, they've gone overboard on their drainage, they've gone overboard on their noise. Although going overboard on their noise is probably just current technology, which has kept the stuff quiet. So I'd say the mitigation measures to stop the impact on the neighbors has been more than adequate. Scale, different subject. I think we can separate those issues, because we're not voting just on finding of fact number 3. We're voting on strictly the mitigation measures themselves. We can deal with the scale. That's also addressed in finding of fact 3. We can address that issue separately.
and we are addressing it separately, I agree with you. But the difficulty that I have is that going back to paragraph 3, I do not know what mitigation measures they are referring to.
Well,
The appellant, just a second, let me finish. The appellant says it refers to light, noise, drainage, landscape.
Yep,
Okay, that's what the appellant says.
yep.
But it doesn't say that. We don't know, because it already says in the introduction, the commission found that the substation met some of the conditional use standards. And noise, air, water, other forms of environmental pollution are just some of the standards.
Okay, just a scale.
So
Is
it
the
could
scale-
very well be
Is scale in there?
that comes under, will be compatible with existing and planned uses in the surrounding neighborhood. That's a different standard. It's a different standard. A separate standard, I should say.
Is scale though directly in the conditional use?
No, not scale.
So scale is not identified in
The
there?
word scale does not appear as a condition, as a standard for conditional use. Scale does not
Scale
appear.
does not appear
No.
as a condition for conditional use. The scale is
The
not
word
ident-
scale is not in there,
Is
but that
size?
doesn't mean it is addressed.
Is size in there?
Yes, I argue it does. because it says, will be compatible with existing and planned uses in the surrounding neighborhood. But let me come back to my main point. I don't know what standards they found it complied with. Because they may very well come back and say, oh yeah, I would fully agree that the noise and those, they basically complied, but there's still, looking at paragraph 5, there's still some questions we had. And you just didn't address them. But we basically agree that you met the standard. You see, that's the problem that I have, and so I'm not sure why we are substituting our own judgment, because we don't know what the commission thought, because they did not verbalize it. That's the problem that I have.
They verbalized a lot of frustration.
They did not verbalize what mitigation measures were not met. Did it refer specifically to size, or did it refer to all of these things that are listed in capital D of general standards for conditional use? That's the problem.
Okay, so
Or
can
C,
we-
for that matter.
Can we take, and we can say they met mitigation standards for, so we could just eliminate the issues from P and Z? Can we say they met it for lighting, we say.
Well,
they met
that's
it
what
for
the
noise?
motion presumably says.
Okay, so our motion basically says, we say they met it for lighting, they met it for noise, they met it for drainage, they met it for landscaping.
You could do that. The difficulty that I have is that I'm more deferential to the board than perhaps you are. And I don't mean this in a negative way. That I would prefer for them to tell us what it is that they meant when they said some mitigation measures were not met, but in other respects, standards were met. Because that would eliminate the necessity of us substituting our own judgment.
Okay? Yeah.
Yes?
I think there's enough frustration at the P and Z board that we're gonna give them another bite at the apple to drag these guys through the mud. And this is gonna take forever for these guys to deliver something that the community needs. I would be in favor of identifying what we agree they meant.
Well, there's a positive side to letting them decide, even though there's a lot of animosity. I agree, there's a lot of animosity on P and Z.
Oh, huge amount.
And it kind of dismayed me that it got that I don't want to say out of hand, but that
did.
critical in dealing with the personalities in this thing. But the positive side, well, let's just look at it from a positive standpoint. If we send it back, then regardless of their animosity, they are going to have to delineate which standards were met, which standards were not met. So it puts the onus back on them, and that may in fact attenuate some of the animosity that was currently present in the prior two hearings. I think they'd have to go back and actually decide that. As we discuss this, what I see is we are looking at trying to figure out, okay, we know from what we see here in the record, what was actually what I consider to be good mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
There are other things in there that they may have been talking about that we didn't consider. But we don't know what they were.
Yeah, well, can we say what we think they did right, and if there are others, they can define them for MEA to meet? I mean, I see enough evidence for lighting, I see enough evidence for drainage, I see enough evidence for noise, I see enough evidence for landscape. I see enough
Well,
evidence there, I see enough in
I
those
see that
areas
too.
that they've done their job. And they don't need to do their job anymore. They've done enough, and they've got engineers that have certified it, they've got professional engineers that have done it, they've taken care of that side of it. You have to go hire 2 professional engineers, or 4, or 8?
No,
How
no, no,
many-
no,
how
no,
many's
that's not
done?
what it would, a remand would not require that at all. There's no further hearing. It is simply a redefining by P and Z of their decision. That's all it is. There's no further hearing if we remand it back, unless we say, we want you to remand this back for further hearing. But if we say, we remand this for you to be more specific and to make specific findings as to what standards were met, what standards were not met, what mitigation standards were met, and what mitigation standards were not met. They will simply, on the basis of the record and on the basis of the testimony and all of the material that was submitted, they will make a decision and answer those questions. That's all it will boil down to. And it would, I don't want to second guess the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's my point. They were there. There are 8 or 9 of them who obviously agreed with these findings. They must have had something in mind, and I want them to explain this.
Well, if the Muni found it correct,
That's not
Well,
the
that's an
point.
advocate.
well,
They're
I can
advocating.
tell you what, the Muni doesn't advocate for anybody but themselves. That's who they advocate for. They advocate for themselves. We get what we want, and we'll give you a conditional, and we'll advocate.
The
That's what
Muni
they-
does not give a conditional use permit. It's the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Oh, but they recommend it, and they recommend it based upon code review.
And the board, the Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent board of the municipality. They make their own decision.
Okay, well,
I have a question.
go ahead.
Mr. Stewart,
Where does the, what happens if we send this back for a remand? What happens to that information then that the P and Z comes up with? Does that come back to us?
it could or it could not, depending on whether that gets appealed again. That particular issue, that particular finding by P&Z gets appealed by either side. It only comes back to us.
This
if
might
it's
be an
not-
opportunity to get this whole thing cleared up.
Right. Absolutely, well, what, by
Even
sending
though I
it
feel
back?
like there's a lot of, there's good mitigation for those 4 things.
Yeah, by sending it back and having them, and then it's gonna turn around and, 1 of 2 things would happen, in my opinion. They're either gonna get frustrated and beyond belief, and this is gonna be going back and forth for 2-3 years. By the time it gets litigated out the wazoo, I see adequate stuff here. I see adequate mitigation here for these 1, 2, 3, 4 items. I think it's pretty clear. And if we want to remand back, if there are additional mitigation issues that are not stated, other than these, define them. Define if there's some other mitigation issue other than these 4, which we say were met. Define them. You can remand for that. We approve these, we say they've been met. But you guys can, if there's something else,
So now you want to do it both ways?
well, no, I'm just saying, there are 4 of them here, there are 4 of them here, mitigation issues, lighting, noise, drainage, landscaping.
That's what the appellant says.
That's what the appellant says. I agree with them. Those 4 were met. I'm not talking about scale. I'm just talking about these 4 right here. To me, they've been met.
Okay.
The muni agreed with it. The municipality agreed with that. They basically approved of their plans. They said, okay, we agree with it. So those 4 issues, I say, met. condition met. Scale, separate issue. And so I would be less likely to remand back to them on that. If there are additional ones that they weren't specific about, then have them come back and be specific.
All right. Mr. Stewart, final comment.
What's the easiest way to get this cleaned up? Is it to send it back for a remand? Or will this actually create, will this muddy the water if we make a finding and then send it back for a partial?
I must
for a
tell
final
you,
remand?
I don't have a crystal ball, but first of all, it is not our job to guess what's going to happen down the road, okay? We are only here to make a decision on the basis of the record. We are not here to guess. So I cannot tell you what is going to be more expeditious because I can hypothecate as to what can happen, and so can you, and so can Mr. Axby. So I do not think we should base our decision on the pending motion on what is more expeditious. We need to base it on what we think is right.
There you go. What we think is right.
So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Final word, I'm not going to vote for this. I have told you before, and I think I have made my position clear. I am not sure what the statement regarding failure of mitigation measures refers to, and I'm not willing to substitute my own judgment for that of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it is for that reason that I plan to vote against. If there's nothing further, we will vote.
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
Is the motion as it stands, just in general, the mitigation measures were sufficient? Or are you limiting it to the mitigation measures with respect to these 4 areas were sufficient?
It's your motion, Bob.
It's your motion.
I think we need to amend it.
Okay, and by amending it, you want to refer to specific mitigation measures. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Listing,
Yes. And what is it that you wish to list?
got it right here in front of me. Lighting, noise, drainage, and landscaping.
Lighting, noise. What was the third?
Drainage.
Drainage,
And landscaping.
drainage, and landscaping. So that the motion is, let's be careful how we word this.
It's to substitute.
We substitute our own judgment for that of the Planning and Zoning Commission, that mitigation measures proposed by the applicant regarding lighting, noise, drainage, and landscaping were sufficient to adequately buffer the surrounding residential uses.
Bob, you agree?
Yes.
Okay? And I seconded that motion. Does that satisfy what we need to do?
I think that's fine.
Okay?
I mean, you don't need to do anything, you already voted on
I
the
understand.
issue, but if you want to do this, you can do it.
Okay, all right. Does that raise any other issues? Are we ready to vote?
Ready?
Mr. Stewart?
So it's phrased now in terms of these 4 are positive. we find that they're
Yes.
met.
Yes,
Aye.
okay. All right. Madam Clerk.
Chair Kerchow, do we need to make a vote on the amendment first before we vote on the amendment?
I think this is a friendly amendment.
Okay.
I'm the second, and so we do not need to have a separate vote on it.
So to the main motion as amended, how do you vote? Baron Kerchow?
Nope.
Robert Stewart?
Yay.
John Haxby?
Yay.
The motion carries 2-1. Let us have 12 minutes, 13 minutes of recess, and reconvene at 8:30.